Well, good evening. Welcome. I'm Steve Frobeater. I'm the co-chair of the Hopkinton Trails Club. Peter Lagoy is the other co-chair of the Hopkinton Trails Club. I'll tell you a little bit about them. We are basically all things trails. We advocate for trails and trail development. We maintain and we build trails. We host monthly trail walks. We meet the second, this is my plug, we meet the second Wednesday of every month in the downstairs conference room at the library for an hour and a half. 6:30 we start. We talk about trails, we talk about things going on with trails, and we plan when our next trail hike is. 6:30 every second Wednesday except next week. Third night of town meeting is next Wednesday, so we've moved it up to 5:30 so that we can be done by 7, so that we can go over and set through the third night of town meeting. So I thought I'd also let you know about other trail-oriented groups in town, because this town is very fortunate to have so many interested parties that come at trails from different angles. So there's the brand new Hopkinton Trails Coordination and Management Committee. That's a selectman design committee, was just stood up about 90 days ago. That's called the TCMT, okay, or TCMC. Everybody has an acronym. Then there's the Hopkinton Area Land Trust, that's HALT, H-A-L-T. Then there's the Upper Charles Trails Committee, the UCTC. And then there's the Friends of Whitehall, that's the FOW. But we all come at trails in a different way. We all come at land stewardship, open space from different angles, but we're all about making sure that we keep Hopkinton with its rural character intact and with open space so that we can all go out and enjoy the woods and the fields. So tonight is our third annual Trails Forum that the Trails Committee, the Trails Club, I'm on a couple of these, but the Trails Club conceived of this idea 3 years ago, launched it. We've brought in outside speakers. We think we have 2 terrific outside speakers for you tonight. And I'm not going to have any more comments, so we turn it over and make sure that they have plenty of time for their presentation. So to lead off tonight, we've got Sean McAuliffe, who is the Hopkinton Health Director. He's been with us a couple of years now. Going on 2? Going on 2. What's your anniversary date?
July 28th.
So he's, terrific guy, doing some real good things for the town, and bringing, I think, a professional awareness to things that a town our size ought to be aware of. So I'm going to give you the microphone and you the floor for a talk about ticks that will shock you.
I started 2 years ago, and one of the first things I did when I started, and any health director, when they start, we have to figure out, what's driving illness. Our goal is to protect and promote health in the community. So I have access to all of the infectious disease records for the community. So I went in, broke all the data down, and the 3 of the 5 leading diseases in town, or 3 of the top 5 causes of illness in town, are Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, and babesiosis, which are all tick-related. The hepatitis C is really an artifact in town. What they're doing is those of us that are in our mid-40s to early 50s, we were potentially exposed to transfusions and other hospital type operations where they weren't testing blood for hepatitis C. So they're getting around to doing it now. So that's an artifact. So technically, it should be Lyme disease, influenza, anaplasmosis, and babesiosis, and then another, I think salmonella comes up. But Lyme disease, annually, Lyme disease, we have on average twice the amount of Lyme disease, sometimes 3 times the amount of Lyme disease than we do influenza in town. So I started looking at the data and said, we're not doing anything on tick education in town. We really need to start educating the public about the disease. And then, you know, when I started looking into the data, I knew we had the illness, but I didn't know what was causing the illness. So what I was fortunate enough to get an intern last summer who happened to be a zoonotic disease specialist from Tufts Medical School, who was getting her master's degree in public health. So we sat down and said, I have all this wonderful medical data. Let's digest it all and figure out what's driving it. And then as we started getting into the data, we started realizing that the black-legged tick is a leading source of illness in town. This demonstrates you have the larva stage, which is right after they hatch out of their eggs. They come out, the larvae don't carry disease. Larva, unlike a fully grown tick, only has 3 legs. But if you happen to go through your yard, especially leaf littered area in the summertime, you might find that you've got like all these little dots on you. If you go by areas where like turkeys are, or where you know that deer hang out, you might go through a patch and all of a sudden realize that you've got 100 little larvae on you. Good thing about larvae is they haven't had a blood meal yet, and if they haven't had a blood meal, they aren't carrying infections. So it's rather uncomfortable, and when you walk through one of these, I spent 45 minutes with my intern plucking ticks. We were like, you know, little chimpanzees plucking ticks off each other for, and we had full Tyvek on, but it was just amazing how we hadn't found a tick on this one property, like in about, I think we had flagged the property for about an hour, and then we hit this one nesting area, and they were everywhere, and we spent, like I said, about 45 minutes plucking them off.
Where was that?
It was on a residential property. Yes?
Sorry, can you be their first blood meal, or do they have to give it?
Yeah, you can be their first blood meal. They'd love that. And then what happens is they move from being, they have their blood meal, and then they go through a kind of metamorphosis similar to like what a caterpillar would, and they go into the nymph stage, and the nymphs, having had a blood meal, and actually I'll get into that in a second. They go into the nymph stage. The nymphs, their only objective is to have the second blood meal, and then when they go through that second blood meal, they molt into either an adult male or an adult female. The good thing about adult males is they don't look for another blood meal, so if you happen to find an adult male on you, there's really no risk, because actually they're not, if they're on you, they're looking for a female. They're not looking to grab a blood meal.
How long can they stay alive?
The northern black-legged ticks or deer ticks have a 2-year lifespan.
Without a blood meal?
Yeah. So they, and that's one of the differences when you look at, because there are black-legged ticks throughout the East Coast, but our ticks have a 2-year lifespan. The ticks to the south have a 1-year lifespan, and that's one of the things that they believe contributes to the higher incidence of tick-borne disease in New England. So with respect to ticks, deer ticks carry Lyme disease, babesiosis, and anaplasmosis, as I said. Dog ticks, we have them here. They're not as prevalent as deer ticks. They carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever predominantly, but we're not in an environment where the hosts that carry Rocky Mountain fever are. So we look for Rocky Mountain fever, but if you've got it here, more than likely you were out west, picked it up. And then what we do now is there are several health departments, the State Department of Public Health, we're all monitoring Massachusetts communities for the Lone Star tick. So the Lone Star tick is the one tick you don't want to get bitten by. So as bad as Lyme disease is and anaplasmosis is, babesiosis is basically like a tick malaria. It'll have you bedridden for multiple weeks. You've got to go on multiple medications, but you can recover from that. You know, you go on several weeks of doxycycline or these other medications, and you can clear up. The Lone Star tick can cause so there's a protein that the Lone Star tick transmits, and it creates a meat allergy. So if you get bitten and you develop the meat allergy, you're unable to have any red meat, dairy products, and then think about all the different products that incorporate meat protein into it. There are medications, there are cancer, what they just realized is that there are cancer medications that have this protein in it, and they had, I think, 2 cases in Tennessee that had passed away from anaphylactic shock after getting their cancer treatments. And then doing the trace back, they realized that they had this meat allergy. So at this point, we've only identified the Lone Star ticks in the kind of the Cape and Island region, and they believe that's primarily because of migratory bird tracks.
Is that meat allergy permanent? Or
That's what they're researching right now, because there's a lot of interest in, they have had some cases where it's been about 8 months to a year where people have had the allergy and then it's lessened. But there are others that are just, it's like having a peanut allergy. And
the metamorphosis through larva and lymph, is that seasonal or is that year-round?
it's seasonal. So, and I'll get to that in one second. So, as bad as ticks are, there is a bright spot. So for adults, only 30 to 50% of deer ticks carry Lyme disease. So if you were bitten, you got roughly a 30 to 50% chance that that tick is infected with anything, with Lyme, and then it decreases for babesiosis and anaplasmosis. Again, dog ticks and Lone Star ticks don't carry Lyme disease. In this area, deer ticks are our primary concern. So it's, how do we manage the hazard? That's one of the, so we identified the problem, and then we were trying to figure out how do we manage this problem in town. We manage our exposure by avoiding or controlling our activities within known tick habitats. We do self-checks. We use repellents, and we can use pesticides in our yards, focusing on those high-risk areas in the yard. So, on a trail, the likelihood of finding ticks, down the center of the trail, adult ticks, is pretty low. What the ticks are doing is they're climbing up on grasses, low bushes, typically around knee height, maybe thigh height and below, and they're just sitting there waiting. It's called questing, and they're like crabs, and they're looking to latch onto your clothing. And that's all I do is I walk out with that. It's like a felt-like cloth, and I just drag it in the, I just drag it like that, and I pick ticks up if they're present. I went out just prior to coming in here, and I got one adult right here in the grass along the tree line. So they're throughout the town. But right now, this is adult tick season, getting to the seasonality issue. So we can modify our behavior to avoid these tick habitats. We can utilize the tick checks to limit the amount of time, because having a tick on you isn't a problem. You know, we had a conservation vendor come in today. He was scratching his neck, and I was like, "You got something?" He's like, "I feel like I have something on me," and he pulled a female deer tick right off his neck. And he's like, "Oh my God." I was like, "Well, it hasn't bitten you. There's no risk." He's like, "Oh, so having a tick on me doesn't mean I've got, any risk of disease." And maybe the good thing about ticks, especially ticks that carry Lyme disease, they need to be on you, embedded in you, and feeding for between 24 hours and 48 hours to transmit the disease. So if you're going out if you're trail walking and you're not wearing any repellent, the first thing you should do when you get back is do a quick check. After I did the flagging, I got up, I checked my socks, my pants, my shoes. When I get home, when I change, I'll do another check of my skin just to make sure I didn't pick anything up. But by doing the check, identifying ticks if they're present, and removing the ticks within a 24 to 48 hour period, again, you're reducing your risk or eliminating your risk. Using DEET and permethrin, the ticks, their noses are in their feet. So if you've treated your clothing, they don't like, they sense the DEET and they start picking their legs up and they say, "I don't want to have anything to do with this," and they'll just drop off. If you have permethrin acts as both a repellent and it will kill the ticks. So if they decide to stay longer, and they have, I forget what the contact time is, but they'll just drop off dead. So these are two ways to further protect yourself. And then,
Permethrin wash your clothes in?
yes.
Is
And
that dangerous to you?
no. And I'll get to that one of the next slides. And then we can utilize permethrin, or we can utilize pesticides. Like in my yard, I live between Route 9 and the Mass Pike, and I said, I don't have that. I never see deer or turkeys or anything. But lo and behold, I went out before a lecture in Wellesley, and I stopped. I stopped pulling ticks at, I think I had 27, and then I just cut the sheet off, threw it in the trash, and told my wife we got to treat the yard. And I went out with a pesticide in my hot zones, and so I've done a limited treatment to control the tick population in my yard. So when we're talking about habitat, it's controlling your activities in the habitat, and it's actually just knowing where ticks like to hang out. If you have a tick applicator who comes to your yard and sprays oils or whatever, and they're spraying the center of your yard, ticks don't hang out. They don't like sunlight. They don't like any environment that's going to cause them to dry out or desiccate. What they do like, so in your yard, you're less likely to find any ticks in your yard. If you have a bird feeder, small mammals like chipmunks, mice, and whatever will go and congregate around the bird feeder. So you might have a concentration of ticks because they're going, eating, and they might be falling off right there. So one of the things that I did here was I just went around the bird feeders to see if I could find anything there, and I didn't. But so it's controlling your habitat. So in the photo behind me, areas where small mammals like to congregate, like wood piles, stone walls, heavy leaf litter, that's where you're going to find your ticks. In your own yards, ticks will be in the shady transition areas around the yard. So if you're controlling the leaf litter, if you're keeping your lawn cut at a reasonable height, you're doing a good job at controlling your tick risk. If you're going to use pesticides to treat around the perimeter of your yard, it's treating maybe that 4 to 5 feet of lawn immediately adjacent to your leafy areas, and that should be enough. And it's because ticks like the leaf litter because it's moist in there. It helps keep their bodies hydrated, and when it's raining or it's inclement, it provides them some shelter. And this year, we had a very wet fall and winter. So one of the things that I do for the community is I go out and so when it's deer hunting season, I spend all my mornings at the deer check stations pulling ticks off deer. This year, I'm like, I'm an educated guy. I've got a master's degree in public health. I'm a zoologist. Couldn't find a tick to save my life. And then we were fortunate enough to have some of the top tick researchers in the area. And Sam Telford came down from Tufts and he's like, "You're not gonna find any ticks." I was like, "Well, what happened?" He's like, "They're just not out because it's so wet." And we went through an entire 200-pound deer. We found one tick. And it was a male just lost looking for love. And yes?
I thought you said they liked the wetness.
They do like the wetness, but there's a point where if it's too wet, they I believe they can both suffocate. And then they just, you think about a lot of mammals, they're not too different than us. If it's really inclement or if it's below 40 degrees, they just don't want to come out, so they burrow themselves in and just kind of hang out in the leaf litter.
If it's kind of a rainy day, but not the deluge, will they come out into your lawn because it's...
Well, you think about, you don't want to get hit by a snowball or a rain, think about a raindrop in a tick size. They're going to shelter to get away from the heavy rain, and then as soon as the rain stops, they're going to start coming out and climbing up the grass or the small bushes and shrubs that they're on. Tick checks, primary areas to look for, especially in the Northeast. Legs, the back of your legs, back of your knees, inner thighs, small of your back, and the back of your head. So for most of this, you're going to need a partner. So it's making sure that this is an active routine. If you're going out on the trails, working with a partner, making sure you're checking your kids.
And the reason for those areas?
Because the back of your legs, your armpits, the back, smaller your back, it tends to all be a little moister, just wetter, and that's what they like. And then it's less visible. When I got bit a couple years ago, mine was right in the back of my left leg, and I'm convinced I got it at Drumlin Farm. And then I worked, I worked 60, 70 hours in a 2 or 3 day period. My old job, I had a crazy schedule. My wife never saw me, and one day I woke up, I threw shorts on. She's like, "God, what is that thing on the back of your leg?" And I had a bullseye that went from, the bottom, the midsection of my calf all the way up my leg. But I've had the tick vaccine, which isn't available now anymore. And they're working on it again. And I've probably been bitten 2 or 3 times that I know of where I've had bullseyes since I got the vaccine, and knock on wood, it's been good. I've been good. A lot of people, especially this year, talking to people who have had, I have to do certain follow-up with certain diseases, babesiosis, anaplasmosis. I have a series of questions I have to ask those individuals that have been diagnosed with those diseases. And most of the golfers, I hate using bug spray. And it's like, well, these, they don't fly, they don't jump. Most of them hang out from my knee height down. Just spray it from your knees down. So if you don't like the smell off, all you got to do is spray your legs. And when one of the next slides, you realize that for all intents and purposes in this community, we really need to focus on our feet, maybe our socks and ankles. So it's just have a can of like Deep Woods Off available, spray at the bottom of your legs. You don't get the smell up here. Or with the Picardin that you picked up, Picardin doesn't have an odor, and that's an effective repellent. During the summer, if you're on a trail, avoid wearing sandals, because the nymphs are what get everybody in Hopkinton. They'll crawl right under your sandals, and they're almost impossible to see. Another alternative to off is treating your shoes, like hiking shoes, hiking socks, gardening pants, with permethrin. Permethrin is both a repellent and an effective pesticide, where you can treat your clothes like she is outside, spray it down, let it dry. When it's dry, you can wear it. It's safe to wear. It won't cause any adverse reactions. It's been studied by just about every environmental agency in the United States. The EPA has approved it. And it's good for several washes. I think it's good for 6 weeks if you're not washing. So sneakers, you'd have to reply maybe 3 times during the summer. But it's an effective tool to combat or to reduce your risk from tick exposure. And again, in this picture, it's treating that transition zone between the lawn and the woods, because that's where all the ticks are. And if you don't like or believe in using spray applications, pellets are an effective means. And I mean, I went to Home Depot and I don't support Home Depot, but they have the product. I got bifenthrin. You can get a bag of bifenthrin, like $10-15. Throw it in a spreader, and boom. So I just use that around my hotspot perimeter area, and I've flagged the yard once since I treated, and I haven't seen any ticks there. So.
Does pellets last longer than spray?
The pellets are a little more environmentally friendly because you don't have the overspray. It's not wafting into the environment. And bifenthrin is safe on, I think, all animals but cats. So if you're, so it's better to use bifenthrin usually right before a rain, and it'll set the pesticide into the soil. And it's, my understanding is it's safe against bees, or it's safe for bees and other pollinators. So it's a simple tool and cost-effective tool. What are we doing in Hopkinton? So last year, and I've got, I'll kind of speed this up, but I've got a research project that my intern did. We took all of the data for the last 5 years, crunched that data, identified when people are getting sick, who's getting sick. We did a risk evaluation of every recreational area, so all the ball fields, playgrounds in town. And then when we realized that's not prime tick, environment, because they're all, there's only one playground in town that has a lot of shade. That's the only playground we found ticks at. But then we sat down with the facilities crew and said, I need the wood piles removed, I need this fence enclosed, and then with about 2 days worth of work that they were actually going to do anyways, they tick-proofed this one playground area. So we weren't finding any ticks, so we went out and we started doing people's yards. And that's when we were like, oh my God. And a few people with big shaggy dogs were like, oh my God, now I'm understanding that I've been doing a good job at controlling my tick risk, but I'm not doing enough to control the tick risk to my dog. And my dog is so fluffy when they come in, and this is where they're like playing, and all of a sudden they started realizing that maybe all the tick bites that I've got are related to my pets. My pet's hanging out on my bed, my pet's hanging out on my couch. So we went out and did this research. We're starting a trail project where we're really working on outreach. This is my first time speaking, so this is my first outreach project. We're coming out with Hopkinton specific brochures, utilizing the data we've generated. The goal is to have alerts that this area you're entering on the trails is a tick habitat. There'll be a brochure box on the trail posts, and we're looking at possibly putting like 40% deep wood off, maybe in the box, and then just working with HCAM to develop videos on how do you use Picardin or DEET, how do you use permethrin, how do you protect your yard, but not needing to reinvent the wheel. I'll show you a bunch of resources that you can go home with and utilize right at home. The other thing we did is became a tick town. So if you happen to find a tick on you that's embedded, don't throw it out. There's value in that tick. Remove it. You can just simply put it in a plastic bag. You could come to the health department and I'll walk you through how to use Tick Report. We entered into an agreement with the UMass Laboratory for Medical Zoology, and they will test your tick. They'll let you know what tick species it is, whether or not it's fed, how much it's fed, so they can gauge how long it's been on you, because there's value in that. If the tick's only, my daughter's tick had only been on her for about 12 hours. So I was able to sit down with a doctor and say, it was a deer tick, probably fed for 12 hours. The tick had just the Lyme disease bacteria on it, and she was too young to give the dose of doxycycline, so we just monitored. We knew that based on that information, we had a fairly low risk of Lyme disease exposure. But the doctor was like, I only wish your husband was crazy enough to have taken the tick off. And she's like, I think you're getting a report today. And he's like, you're kidding me. And then he calls me up and he's like, we really need to start taking advantage of this. It's like, because I actually know how to focus my diagnosis, or the medication prescriptions, because Lyme disease takes one set of medications. Babesiosis it's totally different medications. One is a quinine. Babesiosis is like malaria, so it's a quinine-based medication in another. So it helps the doctors formulate, a treatment. So, and then what it also does is it helps us build a database to know what diseases are in town and how do we, okay, yep. I'm almost done. So we have data for Hopkinton. What we see here is if you're 10 to 14 years old or 50 to 54-year-old are the most likely to get a tick-borne disease. Well, if in the younger age group, the 10 to 14-year-olds are more likely. Those are the kids that are now starting to explore without their parents. The 50, 54-year-olds are probably golfing, gardening, Most people that are gardening, when you plan to go outside and garden, you're not planning to use DEET or off. If you go to the beach or you go hiking, you're planning to do something, and something's triggering you to use, the bug sprays. But what we're going to try to do is develop with the state health department is outreach materials to encourage people to start using stuff more regularly at home, because we really believe that'll affect the rates of disease. The lower yellow and green, so anaplasmosis, you don't see any, actually you don't see any babesiosis or anaplasmosis in the younger kids, and we believe that their antibodies are more effective at fighting off those diseases. So as we grow older, we have a higher likelihood of expressing, or of our bodies, because our immune systems are slowing down, we're at a greater risk of contracting these diseases as we get older. And again, we can address this if we're managing our habitat using tick checks and using repellents. In Hopkinton, we're looking at May, June, July. Those are the primary times of onset in town. June and July. So in May, June, and July. You see in the black, that's when the nymph ticks are most active. So the ticks that are getting us, I have them over here. They're about the size of a poppy seed. So if you've got glasses and you're not wearing glasses, you're never going to find the poppy seed on you. So what we really need to do is, because these ticks are so small, you're not going to feel them tripping your hairs. We really need to focus on managing our exposures in the habitat, using repellents, doing tick checks, or showering after you are working outside or on the trails, and then or treating your yards.
Putting our clothes in dryers
Putting your clothes in dryers.
when we come back out of the field.
And then I've just got a couple more.
Don't have to wash them.
Nope, just the dryer will.
Washing's not necessary,
Just dry them on a high cycle.
20
It'll
minutes.
dry them out. Yep. Yes.
What good is a tip check if they're so tiny you can't see it?
Because it gets you better at finding I couldn't find a larval tick on that sheet to save my life the first day. By the end of the summer, I could look and I could count just by looking at it, just the way they reflect. I just got better at identifying them.
The way they what?
They have a certain they reflect light a little differently. It's really amazing how better you become. And if you want to practice, I have tick tattoos.
What good is taking a shower if water doesn't kill?
Well, the water will, because the smaller ones are moving up your body. So by just like removing dirt, adding the surfactant in the water, they'll just wash off. So 2010, 2018, we had 406 cases of Lyme disease, 21 cases of anaplasmosis, 9 of babesiosis, and 1. So, I mean, it's a considerable amount of people that are, becoming ill.
If you don't know if you're watching your daughter, what are you watching for?
Well, so as we go into the summer, flu is rare in the summer. So if someone develops a fever, the first thing you should do is you go to the physician, say, I have a fever. That's really odd. Could you consider testing me for a tick-borne illness? So with my daughter, we look for aches and pains, different from growing pains, lethargy. We look for, again, any trace of fever, certain rashes, and then I think he runs an immunoglobulin test when he does blood work. But we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen any evidence of a tick bite in her blood.
Do the rashes stay or come and go?
They, it depends. Individual, like most will get a bullseye or some fashion, but then there are others that develop periodic rashes. So and that's the problem with Lyme disease, and that's been the challenge, right? Even to this date, is that physicians aren't using common methodologies to assess risk or to assess illness. Most of them don't know that there's actually a tick diagnosis, like a medical or a physician's guide that the Department of Public Health developed. So we're just trying to build this outreach and work this outreach. So kind of like as I said, we need to treat our clothing when we're going out into the environments, tick checks, reduce the habitat. And if you're going out and raking, if you're gonna rake your yard in the summer, you're going into tick habitat, nymph habitat, and you just make sure that you're applying it. And it's just taking all these tests. And one of the things that I can do is I'll share this slide presentation, and I have a variety of other sources that I can share. I got my cards up if you want to email me. There's a website, Tick Encounter, that and I'll end with this. One of the best things about Tick Encounter is they provide a forecast. So you can get a weather forecast, you can get a tick forecast. So the tick report for this week is that males and females, actually, and we're getting close, we're in May, so nymphs just popped up this week. So we know that there's a male risk. And then those of us that are doing research were on the lookout for the Lone Star ticks. The only place I saw dog ticks in town are behind Cornell's. Any questions? And I'll just kind of move on with that.
So the kind of ticks that you pull off a dog, they get fat and their
Yeah,
legs stick out.
those are engorged. Those have been feeding for a while.
A long time. Are
Yeah.
they deer ticks or?
It
So in other
depends.
words, if you find a deer tick on you, it's been on you for 24 hours. Is it fat?
It'll be slightly engorged. It'll just,
It's not like-
it'll look like more like a pancake. It won't look like it's all blown up like a balloon. But that's the beauty of UMass's lab, is that you pull it off. One of the things I do is I harvest ticks for them, and then they raise the ticks, then they expose the ticks to different blood sources, and they basically time it out. So they've done this so many times that they know that the average tick that's fed for this amount of time is this size, and then they use all that data and the logarithms and whatever to basically be able to figure out how much exposure you've had.
You have less of a chance of getting bitten by a tick if it's like today, 40 degrees and rainy and cold, and I mean, is that a better time to go
That's a
out
better
and
time to be out because they're going to be less active. But that said, I spent less than 3 minutes with this sheet in the grass out here. The grass isn't mowed, and I found a female deer tick like that.
So it doesn't matter if it's cold.
But you know, it's just, again, staying on the center trail. When you go out in groups, the person in the center is probably the safest. If you don't want to be on the wing, and we actually did the center trail, and there were no ticks, you know, obviously on the trail itself. And then we came back, and we didn't find any activity along the edge of the trail. It was when you went out, what is it, French, that goes off? It's that Boy Scout?
The Wellsville Trail.
Yeah, when we got down to some of the moister areas, or the wetter areas, is where we started picking up nymphs. And that's one of the things that we're going to do. It's one of the things that, to learn this stuff, you got to do it. So my 2 interns this summer are going to be going and doing tick walks. So, any other questions? Or anybody?
I got one about diagnoses. So apparently it's fairly easy to identify the presence of the tick, the Lyme disease in the tick. What about in your blood after you've been bitten?
It's much easier to do it in the tick, with the tick.
It's easier with the tick,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then,
Even
yeah.
so if you're positive, it may not be positive in,
but if you have the tick and you know what the tick was carrying, you can at least
right.
give your physician that information. But we're doing a lot more, and we're basically looking to become the kind of the tick knowledge center for Central Massachusetts. And we've got the support of the State Health Department and the University of Massachusetts. But if you have any questions, you know, I've got plenty of cards up. We'll, yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sean's, so this is kind of a redo. Value of trails, I think, kind of preaching to the choir on that one. Everyone knows the value of trails, but just kind of to reiterate, they're places basically for people to walk, hang out, and also they provide value just in terms of feeling good. In Hopkinton, hiking and biking trails are consistently ranked as one of the top priorities. And in the open space and recreational plan, it's also listed as, again, one of the top needs in town. So here in Hopkinton, we're really working on trying to get more trails. Value is as a health resource, enhance safety, and connectivity. And it's interesting, when I put this slide up, and this actually, I used it last year, you can see these kids don't have to worry about the ticks because they're playing right in the center of the trail the way they're supposed to. But there's no cars around, so that's good. But in looking at this, if you think about trails and what they were initially valued for, it was that last item. You used a trail to get from point A to point B. But here in our, first world issues, we're worrying about it as a health resource because, we're not having to walk from point A to point B. We're driving in a car. So it's a way for us to get out and get some health, get some exercise, and then also for enhanced safety, separating us from those cars. So it was kind of funny in looking at this to go to, gee, in today's world, the primary uses are things that people in the old days didn't have to worry about. With regard to health, and I put this slide up because it was sort of interesting. In driving back and forth to work, I listened to NPR, and there's been, I think, at least 3, each of these topics, exercise, but primarily the last 2, contact with nature and the value of stress reduction from walking on a trail, have been topics of late. I don't know why. They had a guy on recently who'd hiked across Antarctica. I think 50 days was it, or some phenomenal amount of time, just talking about how he could see the difference in the snow. But he also talked about how important that stress reduction was for him. He said he'd sit at the desk and you get all bound up in what you're doing. He said you go out for a walk and you come back and the problem sort of magically has solved itself. So and these are things we don't think about, but I think it's really important to think about them. And the more trails we can put in town, the more likely someone is to just get out and go for that walk and benefit from that. Safety, obviously, one of the things we're working on, I'm particularly working on, is trying to get the kids who run through town. My son is on the cross-country team and the track team, and they run through the center of town, and what you see is people turning doing this. It's about a third of the drivers are now watching their laps and not the road. I mean, I run in town a lot too, and there are roads, frankly, right now I won't run on. Front Street, I will not run on. Fruit Street's starting to get that way. I've got one route that I have to do when I'm marathon training because I've got all the miles marked out. I'm not a GPS person. But it gets a little squirrely on some of those routes. So the more trails we can have, the people can get off the roads and get into the woods and explore, I think the better off we'll be. So in 2018, we did sort of 2 paper type things and then 1 actual trail. So in June, we had a little controversy with a trail that I was putting in at the Hughes property. Through that process, the selectmen got involved and decided they wanted to put together, maybe put together a trail committee. And so what the Trails Club did was look at what other towns have been doing.
Like I said, the selectmen did put together that committee, and then we also did some work on the Hughes Trail. So with regard to what we did for the towns, looking at what other towns in Massachusetts have done, we looked at 6 towns, and they varied. Places like Wellesley and Lexington have really well-established trail systems, a lot of use. Northborough, Southborough are sort of just getting up and running. But there were some pretty consistent things. They all had trail committees, for one thing. Those trail committees were responsible as sort of the initial line of discussion with the abutters. How do we help you? If you've got concerns, how do we address those concerns? And then they all worked on maintenance. And what seemed to be the case in all the communities was maintenance was a combination of volunteer and town staff projects. So the volunteers would work either on a particular piece of property, on smaller branch removal, little trimming projects, like the project we did just this past weekend where we cleaned the ditches out on the center trail. But then if a big tree had come down, they would usually get the town involved to do that. And so that's, I think, what we're ultimately going to try to do in Hopkinton. This committee just got put in place. There's, 2 of us here on it. So I'm the chair. The selectmen put together like a laundry list of what we're supposed to do, but we're in the process of figuring out exactly what we really think needs to be done as the town trail committee. But the general purpose is to address the Hopkinton vision of having more active and passive recreation, and doing it by advising the select board on what we can do with regard to trails to address those sort of desires. We're also to be the liaison to all these groups that Fro mentioned earlier, so we can all work together and make sure there's a coordinated effort on a trail. That's been an issue in town with one committee not knowing what the other committee was doing and who's in charge and who's on first, and the idea is to try and coordinate some of that to the extent possible. And then finally, the Hughes Trail. Sort of where we're at this point. The Hughes Trail, if you're not familiar, is if you're going out of town towards Milford, just past Chestnut Street, the blinking light, left-hand turn to Chestnut Street. The Hughes Trail is an open land on the right-hand side there. We've got parking put in. The Trails Club will be out there sometime probably in June to do some cleanup. We put the trail in starting this past fall, and as you heard earlier, there was an awful lot of water coming down, so it looks a little rough right now. But the trail itself still is really nice and gets you into a really nice patch of woods. So got some more work to do. Apparently the base that we've been using for that is a sort of crushed asphalt mix, and the plants haven't opened back up, so we don't have that base yet, but I do have a guy lined up to kind of continue the last little bit. We've got all but the last 300 yards of about a 3,000 foot long trail in. And it's, as I said, it's a really nice patch of wood, so it's just an out and back walk, but nice.
So do you treat the trails in town for ticks?
We do not, but as Sean said, you're not likely to have to worry about tricks in the middle, especially in the middle of basically a crushed asphalt trail.
But that's all in the shade.
Desicate them, so they're not going to really want to stop
Yeah.
anytime.
And there won't be any brush sticking out into the middle of the trail.
But that's a shady trail all the way,
Yes. True, but,
because it's in my backyard. I
yes,
use
but,
it.
Yeah.
but if you stay up in the middle of the trail, unless you're walking by some plants that are reaching up to you, the ticks aren't going to get on you either. They're not just dropping off the
Yep.
trees.
One of the things that with respect to this summer's activities, we're going to look to go out in the trails. And then one of the thoughts is that, so we're looking for those environments where there's a lot of ticks are present, and that would be an ideal candidate for one of these tick signs. So one of the things we could do is coordinate, and we could do a drag down the center, drags down the side, and just to demonstrate where the ticks are, and
Yeah.
you can coordinate.
Now, like with any other problem that you can't eradicate, and ticks certainly fall into that category, you have to manage the problem. So part of managing a problem like this is education. So that'll be, I think, to Sean's point, something we can coordinate on, and when he drags this, we can put a sign up and tell people, we can post it, we can use the Hopkinton Independent, Hop News, and HCAM to get that message out that, this is a tick-safe trail going down the center of this, If your kid's running off into the woods, maybe not, but there's ways to get that message out, and the more people know about that stuff, the more education they have, the less likely they're gonna have a problem. So it's a good synergy, basically, in dealing with this problem. I missed a slide there. Yeah, there we go. So for 2019, two things that we're looking at are continuing the high school. We put the middle school course in 2017. That has some washout on that. That's got to be addressed. But really trying to look at moving forward with the high school component, which is an additional 4/10 of a mile or so of trail that we're looking at putting in. And then the other would be the Hughes Trail. So where the cross-country course is right now, the middle school trail is on the other side of the new turf field in the woods, and then connects up to the center trail. And again, that's a nice little patch of woods. As I said, have some water issues. We need to basically raise that up, and we've got the money. It's just a matter of working with tracking the guy down who's supposed to be doing it for me. He lives down in Plymouth, so if he can't do it, I'll get a local guy to do it. We want the new cross-country course for the high school component to be in the center of the loop road. It's a beautiful area in there. If you haven't been in, it's tall pines. The old rail bed goes through there, through parts of it, but I really want some trail in there. But in thinking about some discussions we've had with the cross-country coaches, how many races they run, and the concern about safety for the kids, there may be some value in maybe not doing the trails quite the detail that we did with the stone dust trails, but leaving them a little rougher, and then using that money and expanding the trail system so that the kids can run on soft surfaces. The school still has a bit of land off to the west. There's a new development going in there, but you can connect down to Berry Acres. So maybe use some of that money to do additional connections. I got a meeting coming up on that in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about, maybe refocusing how we do these trails, and then we'll have to talk to the school committee and convince them. But I suspect that the coaches would be on board with that, because coaches that I've talked to, they're not particularly happy about their kids running through the center of town, or certainly are concerned about that too. And then finally, the Hughes Trail additions. The main trail will be basically a long spur, and then there's going to be a lollipop loop at the end, and then a Boy Scout will build that, and then the south trail coming off there. And that's also going to be interesting from a tick perspective, because these will both be pedestrian type trails. And we should probably talk, because maybe instead of the standard pedestrian where there's no clearance, we might want to clear ourselves something more like a farm, looks more like a farm road, so there's just not the branches coming in that people can come in contact with. So that's what I have, and I can turn it over to Marjorie.
Thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk about easy walks. I love to do easy walks. I learned about, basically it was looking for trails when my husband moved to this area, and he said, where is he was in the Acton area, great trail systems that way. And he said, where is everything? I said, so we started looking. And we started finding things. And I wrote a few newspaper articles. A few of them, they all got published, but there was no place to archive them. And I just had this sense that there was some value to them. So I put them up on my personal history website. I interview families and get their family stories down and turn them into books. So I knew how to do books. but I had this website, and people kept coming to my personal history website saying, "Where's Joe's Rock?" Well, it's in Rentham on Route 121. And after about 500 times that people had asked that, I said, I think there's a need in this area. And in fact, you know, we're not the Cape. We don't have the name recognition of the White Mountains or Cape Ann. We don't have, we're not the Berkshires, but we have easy walks. And this area where we are, sort of Metro West, Southern Worcester area, sort of, we have a lot of easy walks. We have a very few views. We have lots of places with lots of water. And the more I did one book, and I just kept going. And at this point, I've done 3 books, and I'm working on a 4th book. So it's when I say it's sort of a compulsion, people say it's not sort of. It just goes on and on. So I love to talk about easy walks. I like to talk about where they are. And my latest challenge is finding easy walks wherever you are. And I figured the first thing I would do is say, what isn't an easy walk? And we were over at Pagan Hill over in Natick. And I don't know if any of you all have noticed the mud lately. There is mud everywhere right now. And that's all mud that my husband has just gotten through. And that's me after I got through it. Yes, I am still smiling, but I'm up to about my ankles in mud. It was really not an easy walk. And there were more. There were more and more. And we kept saying once we got into the middle, we're too far to turn around. And we kept saying the ground has got to go up. And no, it didn't. And it didn't. And for about 20 minutes, we slogged through mud. Our boots are still drying out. But anyway, I'm going to be showing you some places in Hopkinton. The first place I'd like you to think about is cemeteries. And rather than try to quantify where a great cemetery is for you to walk, consider any of your cemeteries. Check the rules for if they welcome visitors or not, if they have any restrictions. Most of them don't have good places to park. Most of the residents don't need parking. When people go to cemeteries, they come to stay. They don't need power lines. So you get some wonderful views of the trees, lots of planted, beautiful, beautiful sugar maples, but no power lines, but the parking's a problem. You know, talk to your town hall, find out if there's any particular restrictions, but cemeteries are great places to walk. Going to the cliffs of, people wonder in Ireland, why do they go to the cliffs of Moher? Well, that's because it's all paved. And I went there with me and about 10,000 of our best friends. There were lots and lots of people at the cliffs of Moher. I'm feeling like I got to the wrong slideshow because I'm not seeing anything with Hopkinton. So I'm going to check right now and see, because I don't think I showed you.
Isn't that like Whitehall?
Oh, golly. Oh, I thought I had it, and I'm going to check. I'm just going to go back. Forgive me. All right. I'm going to start over. And I'm going to, it should say Easy Walk slideshow. Where's Hopkinton? Hopkinton, there you are. All right. There. We started the same. You see me there. Here we are. Thank you. All right, I hate the technical stuff. So anyway, John Ritz took me on a tour of Echo Lake and Echo Pond, Echo Lake? Echo Lake. And that was my introduction. I actually had a hard time. Have they put the sign up now at the Granite Street so you actually know that there's Parking?
Trail.
Okay.
Parking.
Okay, because when I went, it just looked like somebody's driveway. And it made me really nervous. And I really like to work with towns and say, if you want other people to come, if you want me to put them into my book, put some signs up. So I like safe parking. I like to know that my car is going to be there when I get back. I don't like to think that my car is going to get towed. And so if there's safe parking and it's an easy walk, then it might get into the book. But if there's not safe parking, it's not going in the book. So, and yes, Echo Trail is a beautiful, beautiful easy walk. Wide, clear, straight, flat. What's not to like? The biggest challenge is that it's rather short. And so for those of you who like to go farther, it doesn't really have that potential. A lot of trails that I walk on, I can only go about 2 miles. I have some substantial paralysis in my leg that makes it so that the muscles in my foot just can't go. After 2 miles, it really hurts. So that's my limit. But I can see when I visit places that there are lots of additional trails. So when I notice that, I put that into the books because I know that people who use my books, they have different purposes. We all have different abilities. We've all got different limits. So I will say, you can go farther. It's not that that's as far as it'll go. There's capacity to do more. And I assume that people that are stronger, that have more stamina than I do, they want to go farther. And I like to be able to share that information as well. Hopkinton State Park, we all know it's there. We all know there's the rentals, but do you know they've got heart healthy trails there as well? There's some great trails all through the park. There's trail maps that show you where those trails are. The heart healthy trail, I found a little challenging, and I found out that heart healthy means it gets your heart going. All right, so that means it's got steps. Steps for me are not real great because they can send me off balance if I don't have railings to hold on to. I use hiking sticks. I didn't bring them in here, but they are great for keeping me safe on off pavement. And does anybody use hiking sticks? They're really helpful. Do you ever use rubber tips on the sticks? Do you ever lose the rubber tips? We've glued ours on because I've lost so many in mud. So. But they're really helpful. We take the sticks apart, put them in our luggage, and we travel with them because it's made it so that I have a freedom to move that otherwise I haven't had. I'm a tough student. I was a tough sell when my husband kept saying, "You'll like this. You can do this." I said, No, I need hands-free. And he said, use both of them. And now I do all the time. This is Lake Whitehall, and there are multiple. I was just talking with John about there's a little Whitehall Point, and it's not well marked, so it's not in the book. But Whitehall, but by where the boat ramp is well, I don't know that it's well marked. The north side of Whitehall is actually quite easy walk. I don't go all the way around. That's 6 miles. It's also, as you go around, it gets rougher. And then on the south side, it's actually there's private property issues, there's all sorts of things. But it's a beautiful lake. And when you're not there with all the speedboats, it's a great place. This is Whitehall Woods, and we were talking about that, where it is. It's the little red dot over on the map there, one of your newer trails. And again, John took me out for a guided tour of that, and very quiet. Lovely. It would be, I don't know, there's no sign on Pond Street that it's there. You have to just know that it's the new development, and I don't know when the new development becomes not the new development, but at some point people won't all know that it's there. You guys will have to figure that out, what you're going to do for signage. The Center Trail we've mentioned a number of times, and you all have done some really interesting things with getting not your typical trail walkers out onto the trail. You had the art displays in August and September. I got there to Claflin Place one day and the parking lot was filled. Well, the senior center decided to have a trip to Center Trail just to see the art. And they had little poetry posted along the trail. And so, you know, easy walks are good for not just people with problems with mobility issues, but they're also for appealing to people for different populations that don't think of themselves as walkers, don't think of trails, but they'll go and see some art because it's an outdoor art exhibit, it's an art sculpture place, and that's pretty cool. Waseca is sort of on your Ashland side. It's a Mass Audubon property, and you are guaranteed to see nesting osprey there every spring. It's actually quite easy walks there, and you get out to a pond. The beavers have made it so there's not a loop trail anymore. It's an out and back, but you can still do sort of a loop. And some very cool things to observe there, that a number of years there was a substantial fire, and you can see a community, a plants community restoring from fire. And it's actually a quite large swath of that area that was hit by fire. So these are just things to notice. You know, it's all interesting. And of course, College Rock, that you have walks there every year. And College Rock is actually part of, do you just go around the rock or do you go out into the properties there, John? You just go around?
No, we usually go out on the property a bit.
Okay, because when I first discovered College Rock, I didn't know where all these trails were because they weren't very well marked. I think they are better marked now. In my book, I call it the Adams Street property because the parking is either at College Rock on the north end, where the Milford Upper Charles Trail parking is. There are trails into that property, and then on Adams Street, there's another about 12 car. But it's a 3 towns. How did 3 towns in this state talk to each other and coordinate to get all of that property set aside? I don't know. It's a miracle. But it's actually a very cool area. And I found it because I was looking at a map. And so one of the things that I encourage people if they're looking for easy walks is look at maps. I've stumbled across more properties and they'll be like green and say, I never heard of the Adams Street property. I'm not even sure I don't know that it has an official name, but I finally got somebody to take me out and walk me through there, and now I understand the connection that it's bordered kind of by 495, 16, and 85. I think it may be close to 1,000 acres. It's a substantial amount of property. You don't hear people talking about it. But there's some very, very nice trails through there. So learn to read maps and don't be afraid to explore. Most of us know the Upper Charles Trail in Milford. So you all are still working to connect. They've done their work and it's all paved, and now they're into the maintenance phase. So Louisa Lake is a lovely, lovely section. This was the middle phase 3 for them. You're going to be parallel right to 16 in downtown Milford, a block from all of that mess in downtown Milford, and you wouldn't know it. It's quiet, it's lovely, it's beautiful, and it makes it so you can avoid the street stuff and be off trail and get connected and then get over all the way up to Holliston. They've finished all the way to the Sherburne line. And the 8-arch bridge, you can't see it when you're on it. You actually have to get down off of the trail to appreciate it, but they've made it so you don't feel like you're going to fall off and break your neck, which is a really nice feeling. And so I've seen some gorgeous pictures of the sun coming through those arches at daybreak. It's just a lovely spot any time. And as you go up to the Sherburne line, there's another wetlands, and like Waseca, there's another place where this is actually a heron rookery that you can see nesting herons from the trail. So very cool. You want to bring your binoculars. They're quite a ways off. They don't just hang right at the trail. But I feel so lucky to have these rail trails right near. I live in Bellingham, so I've got stuff in Blackstone, I've got stuff Woonsocket going down to Rhode Island, I've got stuff here in Milford. It's all about 15 minutes away. It's easy, and it's really lovely. And I've also got the SNET that I can walk to from my house, but it's still in process. This is, let's see, I believe, oh, that's an Ashland.
Ashland Reservoir.
It is. Now, initially, I wrote off the Ashland State Park. I said, no, it's not fun. This was on the Warren Center Ashland side of Ashland Reservoir. My camera is not crooked. It goes like this. And you see all those rocks. And I see people running, probably like you, Peter.
Yeah.
People like me don't run through those. It was really, really hard. And then it got even harder as I got over to the Ashland side. It got up like this. And I just said, not going in the book. But I gave it a second chance. And that's another thing, that when you're looking for easy walks, be willing to explore and give another area, even of the same property, another chance. And you might be surprised. When I went back to the Ashland Park side of the reservoir, there was a gorgeous, gorgeous trail that went along that whole stretch on the Ashland, not the Warren Center side of it. That was really lovely. And so as I'm revising that book, it's going in the revision, so it will get included. Maycumber Estates in Framingham. I don't know, has anybody ever heard of that? It's lovely.
Yeah.
It's lovely, and you get some water views, wide open trails. It's a nice loop. It's an old estate, right on the Ashland-Framingham line, and worth looking up. It's going into the revision as well. Again, I'm on a bunch of websites. Do any of you use Facebook? I have a Facebook page, Easy Walks in Massachusetts. I've met more wonderful hiking people. They've got all these different Facebook groups for hiking. And people have sought me out and said, we want to go hiking with you. All right. And then they'll post pictures of where they go. So, allowing yourself to participate to whatever extent you're comfortable with social media will expose you to what other people are doing. And you can say, tell me more. You can contact whoever has posted the pictures and say, tell me more about what the trail surfaces were like. How wet is it? How miserable is it? Or how fun is it? What do you see? And you can engage in conversation. Instagram groups, Soulmates. I think Hopkinton has a Soul, S-O-L-E, Mates Facebook page. And people post up and say, I want to go for a walk here. Who would like to go? And people sign up. There are different ones. Sturbridge has one. I believe Hopkinton has one. So, and this is the Carol Getchell Trail. I took this a couple years ago, midsummer. I just went and visited because I finally found out where the parking was for the end of the trail. Up, it's in the Saxonville neighborhood of Framingham, almost to Sudbury. I got to the parking at Little Farms with an S, Farms, not Little Farm Road, Little Farms Road. And we walked a ways, and have you noticed that it's been raining lately? Well, the Sudbury River noticed, and the Sudbury River basically filled the trail. There was a board that should have helped us get over, and we put one foot on and it sank. And we said, well, okay, we're not going to go there. So we went back to the other end where this boardwalk was, and we got a little ways on the boardwalk, and then it went to where it's supposed to be dry, and the river had filled in there. And so we didn't go any farther there as well, but I know that the river will go back down. So it's about a mile from Little Farms Road down to Danforth Road, and it's beautiful, beautiful views of the Sudbury River. And it's all either boardwalk or dirt track, and there are some roots and some rocks. I can't guarantee how many roots or how many rocks, but when you've got a water view, you can slow down and you cannot have to rush.
What's the name of that trail?
It's called the Carol Getchell Trail. Getchell. There are websites. Most of these things I now am able to find something, whether it's Trail Link or other sources. When I started doing this in 2013, very little was online. I really had to work to find things. I had to call up conservation agents and say, where are your trails in different towns? Many towns had nothing online. Some of them still don't. Towns like Sherburne choose not to and say, here's our book, you can buy it. So I finally bought it because that was the only way I was going to find out where all their trails were. And then I can choose which ones I'll put in my book. But, and then this is the walk-up reservation. This is the Sudbury Valley Trustees oversee this. It's almost right up right by Route 9. It's surrounded by office parks, but what you're looking at here is a former trolley road path. And so, you know, there are trolley tracks all over New England. And when you have those, the walking is actually very, very easy. It may take a little step down here or there, but it's wide, it's flat, because trolleys are trains. And so where you've got trolley lines, the SNET, a lot of the SNET has trolley lines coming in to it and or accessing to the SNET where I live in Bellingham. The SNET goes from Franklin to Douglas, and they're still working on it. But it's a 22-mile proposed trail with lots of sections that actually are walkable. But
For those who don't know, what does SNET
SNET is Southern New England Trunkline Trail. And even that is a misnomer because that's not exactly what that track was. It was called the milk train. And farmers would drop their milk off on the train for the train to take it into Boston. And a bridge in Connecticut, in Pomfret, Connecticut, I believe, washed out in 56, 66, around there, and they never replaced it. And the trains didn't run anymore. So it's abandoned rail line. All of the rails got pulled out. Then all the gravel got pulled out. So now we're putting the gravel back. So there's a lot that we still need to do, but that's okay. Mill Pond in Westboro is also another. There's about 4 different trails. From what I could tell, there's only one that's really very easy, and that's on the north side of Mill Pond, and you're going to get views like this. It's actually quite lovely. But there are, for those who want to do additional walking, Mill Pond is still a great place to park, and you can go to the south side. You can go over to the golf course. There are a number of additional trails just from parking in one spot. Mill Pond what is the Route 30? I think it is going to Grafton.
Route 30 to Otis Street.
Yes. Thank you. All right, and then you all here in Hopkinton connect to the Upton State Forest. And so this is the reason Upton State Forest has some easy walks is because of the CCC. The Civilian Conservation Corps built fire roads in state forests all over Massachusetts. They also have one of the few remaining headquarters buildings in the state in Upton. But they have these roads because that's what they did to give people work, was come, and it was all about fire prevention. So they built fire ponds. Foxborough State Forest has them. Wrentham State Forest has them. I believe Franklin State Forest does, but a lot of that has gotten subsumed by the Franklin dump. But anyway, they worked a lot. They're places that are easy walks. So when you know about places that the CCC has been active, it's more likely that you're going to find easy walks all over the state. So those are things just to keep in mind is understand the history of the land use as well. This is over in Walpole. This is Adams Farm. 3 years ago, nobody had ever heard of it. Now there's a sign on 109 that says Adams Farm. People are starting to put signs so they're not these secrets that people have to hunt for, and actually make it so people are more welcoming. And this is 700 acres of open land with a lot of open connected trails. It's really very, very nice. The Neponset in Walpole flows right through downtown Walpole. Has anybody ever seen the Neponset River flow through downtown Walpole? It's because it goes under old industrial buildings. It was used for power. So and it's covered over and paved over, and it's really pretty hidden. But the Walpole Town Forest right behind the high school actually gives you some beautiful views of the Neponset River with a bridge over it to boot. So big, wide, basically it's a fire road right behind the high school, a half mile, but then there's additional other trails as well that are also really nice. They're all on one map. It's a little tricky to figure out sometimes. Bird Park, Trustees of Reservation. We got so many different organizations in just Massachusetts that are looking after different properties. We've got Trustees of the Reservation, we've got Mass Audubon, we've got Army Corps of Engineers, we've got every town has town properties, we've got Mass DCR, and none of them talk to each other. And none of them have websites that link to each other. So that's where, if it's an easy walk and it's in the towns that I'm trying to cover, it's going in the book. I don't care who, I'm grateful for all of the people who oversee these properties, but somebody's got to talk to each other. And that's where I feel like I have filled a role that has had sort of a vacuum, that there's almost too many different stakeholders and they don't know what each other is doing. You may not know that you've got one property a quarter mile down from the other because they're owned by different people, they're on different websites, and nobody even realizes it. So Trustees of the Reservation does Bird Park. They also do Moose Hill Farm. Most of you have probably heard of Moose Hill Audubon, right? In Sharon. Moose Hill Farm is a quarter mile away, but it's Trustees of the Reservation. And never the twain shall meet. So, but Moose Hill Audubon has the views. Moose Hill Trustees of the Reservation has the woodland walks. They basically are all of a piece, but you just gotta, you could hike down the road and go to both of them. And we've got towns like Franklin that are working to create, this was a new property, the Delcart Conservation Area, and Franklin is working to make this more accessible. This is a floating bridge that they made to make a loop trail, keep people away from the commuter line train tracks that are right on the edge of the property, and keep them in the woods, get them across the pond, give them great views, keep the kids from falling in over the water, and you know, it's going to be fun. My kids love it.
Is this visible from 495?
It's visible from the train.
From the commuter line in Franklin.
Okay.
Yep. Here's the Hidden Charles in Bellingham. You just have to go down a trail behind one of the athletic fields, and people don't even know it's there. I worked with an Eagle Scout to mark trails. Choate Park has now trails not just around the pond, but behind, all the way connected to Medway High School, and they're headed up to Holliston to link up with the Upper Charles Trail. Hopedale, has anybody heard of Hopedale Parklands?
I lived there.
Okay.
I was on that trail almost daily.
If people live in Hopedale, they know it. If they don't, they don't. This was a carriage road before they started building carriage roads in Acadia. 100 years ago. And West Hill Dam, this is Army Corps of Engineers, great trails there, right in Uxbridge. Riverbend Farm, this is part of an abandoned towpath, was nearly forgotten for 150 years. It was a transportation system from Worcester all the way to Pawtucket, 50 miles, 48 locks. Amazing. This is 1 mile of towpath that they've saved. There are remnants all through the Blackstone Valley. We were in the Delaware Water Gap. This was just a little park that they did right by the bathrooms. Oh, yay, there's a place to walk right by the river. It was really lovely. And this was right by the Philadelphia airport that we were at for a conference. I was watching traffic go by, and we found 2 miles away this wonderful 10-mile bike trail with water on both sides. The birds didn't mind the jets at all. So here's another view of cemeteries, and this is back at Riverbend Farm. Look for groups, events. You're going to find locations when people sponsor events, child-friendly type things. They need to go on easy walks because that's what you need for children. And so that's a way just to look for when groups are doing things. This is the Upper Charles Trail in Holliston. Again, they do this New Year's Eve every 5 to 8. New Year's Eve, they have bonfires all along the trail. You roast marshmallows. It's really fun. And they also have a story walk right near there as well on that same Upper Charles in Holliston. And Town Commons, great spot for walks. A lot of them have sidewalks. They even have benches. And arboretums. Whenever we go to a new area, we look for an arboretum. They'll even label the plants when you're in a new area so you know what you're looking at when you're in a different part of the country. It's wonderful. The Arnold Arboretum, the same. No cars. Great walking. And when you go to Ireland and to Western Ireland, it's really rough tracks. So you go on farm tracks and you just share it with a sheep or two and sometimes a cow. And then the Cliffs of Moher, where everyone goes, gets their pictures taken, but it's paved. It's cement walkway. That's why people go to these gorgeous cliffs, because it's so easy to walk. Busloads, thousands of people. And this is Newfoundland. Who would think Newfoundland has easy walks? Up until they put the roads through in the 70s, there were no trails. That was only accessible in the winter by sled. Basically, people lived in those communities on the shore and got their mail in the winter only. That was the only time it was passable. It is such rough territory, but there are still trails. And sometimes when you go to Newfoundland and the trail is 2 miles to the fjord and the boat ride that you want to go to, you ask for help because everybody needs a hand sometimes. And this was the only way we were going to get me out to that boat ride. 2 miles, my husband pushed me, and then I walked back. And it worked. But sometimes you got to ask for help. And that's Berry Acres when the beavers were busy underwater. Mm-hmm. That's me many years ago going to Purgatory Chasm. Everyone says, oh yes, you should go to Purgatory Chasm. This is what it really looks like, folks. That's my poor mother trying to climb on those rocks. And it's not easy. There are easy trails there, but the chasm itself is really not very easy. And that's another not very easy trail. And this is part of the SNET that is undeveloped, and yet it is actually quite walkable. Not much of a great place to park, but you can walk on it. You have to explore. And there we are. So, explore, read. Tell people you're looking for easy walks, and they will offer 1,000 suggestions. Be wise in how you take anyone's advice, and you know your own limits. I'm Marjorie Turner Holman. I have Easy Walks in Massachusetts books. I would be happy to take home a few less if you all are interested. Friend me on Easy Walks in Massachusetts Facebook page, and any other questions, I'd be happy to see if I can answer any. All right. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.